Well, I mean, there's I can't remember, it's the American Federation of Scientists or something of that nature. They run something called the Doomsday Clock. They've had it up for some time now, where they track the countdown to disaster in terms of the potential of nuclear conflict. And the clock has moved around over the years. When the INF Treaty was signed back in 1987 and implemented, the clock actually went backwards because everyone went, whoa, we're starting to walk away from the nuclear. And then reality set in, the clock started moving forward, and everyone they move it back and forth. It's political in nature. And what I discussed with you is that after Putin spoke, I said, let's stop playing games. Move the clock up to 1 second before midnight, because that's where we are, literally 1 second before midnight. Russia has made it clear that it's not bluffing. It's just literally not playing games. And through the actions that Russia took this week in not only declaring partial mobilization, and I'll get back to that in a second, but linking that to referenda that are being conducted in the oblasts of their districts of Kherson, Zaporizhia, which today are considered sovereign Ukrainian territory under occupation of the Russian military. And then the Donbass, the two republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, which declared independence back in February. That independence was recognized by Russia, not recognized by anybody else. Ukraine still views that as part of sovereign Ukrainian territory. All four of these oblasts are holding referenda starting today, right now. The vote's happening. And when the vote is finally tallied, I think they plan on the referendum going for 5 days. So on the 27th, they'll count up the votes. They say it won't take that long. They're going to pass the results to the Russian parliament. It's anticipated the results will be overwhelmingly in favor of joining Russia. And then the Russian parliament will approve this, send it to the president. President Putin will approve it. And we just see Russia expand. We see Ukraine shrink by 20%, and we see Russia expand. And that territory stops being Ukrainian territory and starts being Russian territory, Mother Russia, the homeland. Now, the world can sit there and say, we don't recognize this. It doesn't matter. Russia does. And the only thing that counts when talking about implementation of Russian nuclear doctrine is what Russia believes. And if Russia says this is now Mother Russia, and any attack against Mother Russia will bring about a response using the totality of our capabilities. The totality of our capabilities. And when you refer to Russian nuclear doctrine, that means nuclear weapons. And Putin stared the camera in the face and said, I'm not bluffing. It's not a bluff. So we have a situation where NATO, the United States, Europe, they all operate in this alternative reality. And normally, fantasy life, people should applaud fantasy lives. It's not unhealthy. This one's unhealthy. This fantasy that somehow Ukraine is winning the war, somehow Russia's the aggressor, somehow NATO is the innocent party, is absurd in the extreme. I mean, the speech that President Biden gave to the United Nations in regard to Ukraine, if fact-checked by any credible historian, would just be a joke, a tragic joke, but a joke nonetheless. It's so far removed from factual truth, historical reality, to blame Russia as if NATO had no part in this whatsoever. They can document the fact that starting in 1992, the mission of NATO was to weaken Russia. We know that because when James Baker came back from his meeting with Shevardnadze and Gorbachev about the expansion of NATO, and he said, hey, I sort of told him we're not moving forward. The National Security Council came back and said, nah, sorry, that ain't going to work. We're expanding NATO because we need to make sure that Russia never again rises up and reaches stature of the Soviet Union that just collapsed. We don't want that. We have to keep Russia permanently down. And that's been the mission of the United States. That's been the mission of NATO since day one after the Soviet Union collapsed. And we've seen it with NATO expansion. We've seen the invitation to Ukraine. And we see NATO right now basically creating a proxy army on Ukrainian soil for the sole purpose of killing Russians, as our esteemed Secretary of Defense said, to bleed them white, to weaken them so that Russia will never again be able to assert itself as it has done in Ukraine. It's about the permanent weakening of Russia. We saw that in the 1990s. People say, well, Scott, that's his theory. No, for a decade, we saw what the policy was. The economic castration of Russia. That's what we did. We went in there and we gutted it. Our goal was to suppress it, to exploit it for our economic benefit, not without any care for the Russian people. And the political disenfranchisement. We called it a democracy. There was nothing democratic about Boris Yeltsin. It was handpicked by the United States and then sustained by the United States. I always laugh when the Democrats go, oh, the Russians stole the 2016 election. No, they didn't. You just had a bad candidate and Trump beat you. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump won a national election speaks not so much about Donald Trump, but the really horrible nature of the candidate you put up against him. All right? The Russians didn't steal anything. You lost the election. Plain and simple. But you know who stole an election? The United States in 1996. Hell, we don't even try to hide it. Time magazine put a cover out there and said, we stole the election. We bought it. We paid for it. Yeltsin's our boy. That's what we do. And the Russians know this. The Russians try everything in their power to prevent this conflict. When the coup, the U.S.-backed coup in Maidan, in February 2014, because that's what it was. Even like Michael Mafal today can't even deny it. Yeah, we sort of wanted it to happen. Yeah, we wanted Viktor Yanukovych out. Yeah, we wanted our own guys. What guys? Oh, let's ask Victoria Nuland. She was on the phone. Yats is our man. Yatsenko became the future prime minister. We handpicked the coup plotters. They were going to take over once we got rid of the legally elected president of Ukraine. And then these coup plotters turned around and started burning Russians to death in Odessa. They started raping Russians. They started dehumanizing Russians. And you know what? The Russian population, the Donbass, said, no, we're not going along with this. And they rose up. First thing they did is to say, we want to be independent. Now, this evil man, Vladimir Putin, who's plotting to resurrect the Soviet Union, you know what he said when they said we want to be independent? He said, no, you're part of sovereign Ukraine. We have to respect the sovereign territorial integrity of Ukraine. We won't, recognize your independence, but we will back you to protect your rights. And we will now work with the international community and the Ukrainian government to institute legislative changes in Ukraine that guarantee you rights while you remain part of Ukraine. So you can speak Russian, be educated in Russian, have your Russian culture, have your Russian history, all that, but you're going to Ukraine. And the Ukrainians signed on to it, the Minsk Accords, Minsk II, because we had Minsk I and collapsed Minsk II. But we now know that from Petro Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, there was a sham in the eyes of the Ukrainians. They had no intention of ever complying with their obligation under this. It was solely put in there to buy time. So what? So NATO could train a Ukrainian army that could forcefully conquer the Donbass and, in the fantasy world of the Ukrainians, take Crimea. That's what happened here. And NATO expansion and bring Ukraine under its umbrella so that Ukraine has Article 5 protection only speaks again to the nefarious nature of what NATO was doing, what the United States was doing, what Joe Biden was doing, because all of this stuff took place when Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States, in Ukrainian policy. So for Biden to stand before the United Nations and pretend that he's innocent, NATO's innocent, and the only guilty party is Russia is absurd in the extreme. Russia's back was against the wall. Russia had no choice, confronted with the reality that Minsk was never going to be implemented, and all that training that took place from 2015 to 2022 had produced a NATO-style army that was massing on the borders of the Donbass, 60,000 strong, ready to launch an attack, push the Russian military out of Donbass, capture the Donbass, and subject the Russians there to the kind of torture, rape, and murder that we last saw, since the last time Ukraine took over territory. Look what's happening in Kharkov right now, where they're literally dragging people out of their homes and shooting them on the spot, putting them in trucks, taking them off in the woods and gunning them down like the Nazis used to do the Jews back in World War II. That's happening right now. America's great democratic ally, the Ukrainian government, has unleashed the Nazis. That's it. So Russia has basically said, we're not playing this game anymore. We tried to come in with a special military operation. We tried to, free the Donbass from the yoke of Ukrainian oppression, but NATO of course, couldn't allow that to happen because it went against what NATO stands for. NATO's not going to sit back and let Russia get stronger. NATO's going to forcefully intervene to try and weaken Russia. To what goal, you might say? Weaken Russia. To dismember Russia. To break Russia up into little pieces that aren't a single nation, but many nations that are all weak and all can be kept under control of the United States and NATO and Europe. And Putin knows this, and Putin called them out. He says, we know what you're up to. We know what game you're playing, and that game is over. We're making Novorossiya, the new Russian territories. They're going to become part of the motherland, and that changes everything. The Russians have said, any Ukrainian troops on Russian soil after the referendum will be viewed as occupiers and destroyed. The Ukrainians are going, wait a minute, that's our territory. It doesn't matter what you think, guys. It's over. You're now on Russia. You will be annihilated. So will your government. So will your capital. The Russians are probably going to end up taking Odessa and Kharkov to complete the acquisition of Novorossiya, and Russia will destroy NATO if NATO tries to intervene. How will they destroy NATO? Conventionally, Russia's building a conventional military. You know, Putin called for the mobilization of 300,000 people.
Right.
They're all combat veterans. He's not bringing in conscripts. He's not bringing in cooks, bakers, and candlestick makers. He's bringing in guys that previously served in combat units, preferably combat experience, and he's going to bring them in. Now, are these guys going to be put in the front line? No, because Putin recognized they're reserves. They may have been hardcore killers at one point in time, but for the last 5-10 years, they've been at home, eating mama's food, getting a little fat, a little soft around the middle, a little gray in their hair, a little receding hairline. The muscles come a little bit flabbier, but they still have some experience. He's put them into reserve units, and the reserve units are going to man the frontier, protect the borders, and man the rear areas, protect the strategic depth, freeing up around 120,000 real killers. The hardcore contract professional soldiers of the Russian military that haven't been able to bring their full firepower to bear. Russia's going to have about 210,000 genuine killers on the front line now, and they're going to be unleashed. They're going to be able to fight doctrinal war. The world is going to be introduced to what the Russian military is really capable of doing. The Russian military has proven that they're capable of killing tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. They destroyed the original Ukrainian army. All that's left is this new reconstituted NATO army. But the original Ukrainian army, all the equipment's gone. 50% of the men are either dead or wounded. And that's with Russia operating with one hand tied behind their back. Both hands are out now. The gloves are off. The leaded knuckles are on, and it's over. Literally over. What's NATO going to do? There's nothing they can do. While Russia's getting stronger, Russia's going through a mobilization process right now that's mobilizing 1% of its mobilization capacity. They have 25 million former service members that are in the reserves. They're mobilizing 300,000. In a week's time, if they decide to need 300,000 more, they can do it like that. Do it like that. Do it like that. In a month, they can have 2 million men mobilized if they want. What's NATO done? Their military is pathetic. They don't train properly. They don't train to fight large-scale warfare. Their equipment is old. It's poorly maintained. The entire German army had to cannibalize itself to get one battalion sent to Lithuania. Now they're talking about mobilizing a brigade, and they're all panicked. How do we do that? A brigade, oh my God. Russia is mobilizing the equivalent of an army group, and NATO can't even generate 10 battalions. So they're pathetic. But not only that, they've given all their weaponry away to the Ukrainians. They've robbed all of their arsenals, given the weapon to Ukraine, and Russia's just destroyed it. Destroyed it. So NATO's getting weaker while Russia's getting stronger. And NATO wants to pick a fight with Russia? Are they high? But if they do, Russia's made it clear. We will use the means necessary. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Russia will start off with nuclear. Russia has a lot of weapons that they haven't deployed so far in this campaign. And NATO may very well wake up one day to find out that NATO headquarters is a smoking hole, not because of a nuclear bomb, but because of precision-guided hypersonic missiles. Ramstein Air Base, where everybody meets in relative safety, where they all come together and plan the destruction of Russia, it may no longer exist, not because of nuclear weapons, but precision-guided hypersonic weapons. And then what is NATO going to do? Nuke Russia? No, Russia didn't use nuclear weapons. Strike Russia? Do it at your own risk, because now the Russians have come in and take out London, take out Paris, take out Brussels. And then what's the United States going to do, knowing that the next move means the end of the world? Putin ain't bluffing. Why is the United States and NATO making an existential issue out of Nazis? Because that's what we're doing. We're basically saying to everybody who lives in the United States, Biden is saying, I'm willing to sacrifice your lives, your future, everything to defend Vladimir Zelensky or Volodymyr Zelensky and this Bandera Nazi regime. Non-democratic, brutal, rapist thugs. But I'm willing to sacrifice all of your lives, not just your economic well-being. I've already done that. He won't be honest about it, but that's what he's done. I'm not going to sacrifice just our allies' economic well-being. I'm willing to sacrifice all of humanity for a Nazi. That's what Biden should be saying, because that's honest. Putin's at least honest enough saying, I'm willing to sacrifice the Russian nation in defense of the Russian nation. Hey, compare the two. I think Putin's got the better case.
So, I had asked you the other day, are we in a more dangerous situation than the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yes. Look, the Cuban Missile Crisis, when you look at it from a historical standpoint, it began with the United States deploying Jupiter missiles into Italy and Turkey. The Jupiter missiles in Turkey were literally minutes away from striking an important Pitsunda, which is a dacha on the coast of the Georgian Black Sea in what's called Abkhazia, part of the Republic of Georgia. That's where Khrushchev liked to go out and hang out. That's where Russian leaders like to hang out. The whole coastline was full of dachas and camps where the Russian elite would vacation, come in and relax. And so the idea of having the United States able to push a button and minutes later destroy Pitsunda, and if Khrushchev's in Pitsunda, he can't get out. There's no way he can get out in time, so he's going to die. The Russians are like, no, that ain't going to work. How do you respond to that? Well, you put missiles in Cuba. So the United States faces a similar threat. The United States knew from day one, when you read all the transcripts and everything, they knew this was about the Jupiter missiles. That's why there was a secret deal. How did we end the Cuban Missile Crisis? It wasn't through American resolve, the naval blockade, making Russia back down. We ended it by compromising, saying, you get your missiles out, we'll get our missiles out. And that's what happened. So there was no threat of nuclear war. There could have been an inadvertent thing. There was one Russian submarine commander, when he was being depth charged, thought about firing a nuclear torpedo against the American ships. That could have caused some problems. But the idea, both sides knew what they were doing. It was a controlled crisis. We have a crisis today that's totally out of control. One of the reasons why it's out of control is that NATO and the United States do not have a realistic appreciation of the seriousness to which Russia treats what's going on in Ukraine right now. I mean, when we sit here and call it a sham referenda, that means we are so divorced from reality. There's nothing sham about it. It's real. It's binding. And once the parliament approves it and Putin signs off on it, becomes constitutionally a prerequisite to defend. What we need to respect is that Russia views it as real. Now, politically, we can say we're not going to respect it. We'll always draw the maps we want to do it. But in terms of shaping our policy going forward, we need to respect the fact that Russia believes it's real. Therefore, we should not do anything toward this new territory that challenges that. We need to respect the fact that, and we did that in the Cold War. We never once recognized the Baltic republics as being part of the Soviet Union. We always drew the maps with the Baltic republics separate. But did we send Marines to land in the Baltic republics? No. Why? Because we knew it was the Soviet Union, and if we did that, the Soviets would blow the crap out of us. We respected the reality, even though we maintained our political fiction. We need to do that right now, too. We can draw the maps any way we want. We can call the Crimea Ukraine. We can call these new Novorossiya, we'll put them in as Ukraine, occupied Ukraine, whatever we want to call it. But when we deal with the Russians, we have to respect the reality that Russia views it as the Russian motherland, and they're willing to die for
it. All the things you just said, do you believe Biden is aware of them?
Look, Joe Biden had the Ukrainian portfolio when he was vice president. If he's not aware of it, then he's truly the dumbest man on the face of the earth. And maybe you just answered your question. This is a man that was a senior senator in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, headed up all the committees. he should be well briefed on the issue. Joe Biden, although he lives in his own world, he is the ultimate narcissist, and narcissists tend to only focus on themselves, not on others. So it's possible that Biden believes the fiction, but he shouldn't. He is positioned to know the truth. And even if he's not, we don't always elect presidents who are the sharpest knives. We elect people who sound good, look good, act good, but they're really dumber than dirt. Most presidents are dumber than dirt when it comes to foreign policy, but they surround themselves with capable people. But Biden has surrounded himself with a bunch of neoliberal, American hegemonists. Tony Blinken's not going to tell him the truth because Tony Blinken's too busy spouting propaganda. Jake Sullivan's not going to tell him the truth for the same reason. Lloyd Austin, which is take him off the table because he wouldn't know the truth, but they hit him in the face with a 2x4. Who's left? William Burns, CIA director, former ambassador. He knows the truth. He should be telling this. He should be screaming this to Joe Biden, what's going on. We just, the Sullivan, the former ambassador who just left, he should be consulting with them, telling them what the truth is. There are a number of people who know the truth, know the reality. I'll also tell you who knows the truth. Go into the Pentagon and find the Russian foreign area officers that haven't been politicized, the real ones, the ones that got educated, speak the language, know the culture, and ask them. And they'll tell you the truth. It doesn't mean that they're pro-Russian. It means they understand the Russian mentality, how the Russians are posturing themselves, and they're the ones you should ask, is Russia bluffing? And if they're worth their salt, they'll look in the eyes and say, sir, they're not bluffing. Not at all, because that's the truth.
If you turn on the TV and you pick up a newspaper, everything that you're saying, I do not hear or read about. This is pretty pervasive, isn't it?
It's totally. You're not going to hear any of this on me. Look, I'll give you an example. CNN, I watch them because you have to know your enemy. I don't watch them because I enjoy them. I watch them because I literally have to know what my enemy is thinking, and they are the enemy. They had a guy on the other day, and Wolf Blitzer starts off the discussion about the events of the Maidan, and he said, and they removed Putin's puppet, Yanukovych. And I'm like, really? Putin's puppet? You don't know Yanukovych. You don't know anything. I mean, why would Putin's puppet actually be working to join the EU as opposed to aligning himself with Russia? Because that's the direction that Yanukovych was going. It was only when reality hit him in the face and he realized he couldn't go to the EU, he had to pivot back to Russia, that he implemented the policies that created the demonstrations. But to call him a puppet is to show how ignorant, pathetically ignorant you're all. And in the case of Wolf Blitzer, willfully ignorant. And that's the thing. This isn't state-controlled media where Blitzer has to read the transcript put in front of him. Wolf Blitzer and CNN made a conscious decision to deceive the American people. And I hope one day the American people wake up and do the right thing, which is to turn off CNN, bankrupt them, get them off the airways, because they don't deserve to be heard by anybody.
During the Vietnam War, we were lied to for a number of years. We're being lied to again. What's going to make the American people wake up? A nuclear bomb?
They're already waking up. People are starting to ask the question. All you have to do in most American cities is walk out on the street and get off the main thoroughway, just move one block away and you see the homeless, you see the drug addicts, you see the prostitution, you see people pooping in the streets because there's no public restrooms. You see, just the total pathos of a nation that's degenerating in front of our very eyes. And people are saying, why aren't we taking care of this? And then when they find out that we're sending tens of billions, probably ultimately hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine, and once the truth is exposed about Ukraine, I think people are going to start to question this. I think people are going to take a look at what's happening to Europe this winter. And that's, of course, going to have a cascading impact on us and ask themselves, why? Why is this going on? And at that point in time, I think they'll start waking up. Now, we've never shown as a nation the ability to shut down so-called independent media because they've lied to us. I mean, if that was the case, nobody who reported on Iraq back in 2002, 2003 would be in business today, and yet they've all thrived. But I do believe the times they are a-changing, to quote Bob Dylan. And I do have confidence in the ability of the American people to wake up, because things are getting so bad and the government is failing so much on such a broad spectrum that the American people, the cocoon of comfort is being ruptured. The American people were a consumer-based democracy, if we want to call ourselves a democracy. Everything's consumer-driven, and so long as we are kept in a cocoon of comfort, we tend to rock around like little caterpillars, and we're all happy. But when you break that cocoon of comfort and you're exposed to the reality of the world, I think the Americans are going to get shocked because now they're jolted out of this fantasy world that they live in. The fantasy world that we are somehow a bright, shining city on the hill. We're not. We're a pathetic, rundown ghetto at the bottom of the hill, and all crap runs downhill, and it's accumulating right in our front yard. That's the reality. And someday they're going to wake up, open the window, and smell it, and realize something's got to change. And that something that's got to change is the entire establishment that has been lying to them for their entire lives. I can't think of any time in the lifetime of my children that the U.S. government has ever told the truth on anything of substance. We lie about everything. We're incapable of telling the truth. We spin everything. There is no such thing as an American politician who has stood there and told you the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help him God or whatever he believes in. They all lie. And who's to blame? Well, they are to blame for telling the lie, but we're to blame for electing them continuously. Mm-hmm. The solution, it's a two-party system. It's hard to get a third party in. But why, the Democrats claim to be these righteous people. Next time there's a Democratic National Committee convention, storm it, take it over. Revolution, baby. Move them all. They're going to complain? No. Hold an immediate referendum, say, we vote you out, get off the stand. Remove him from the stand, take over, and put your own people up there. Stop letting people pick your elected representatives for you. Do it at the local level. Do it at the state level. Do it at the national level. Otherwise, you're just sheep. And you know what happens to sheep? You get slaughtered. Finally to the slaughterhouse. And I won't have any sympathy for you whatsoever.